I signed the last page with a pen that barely moved across the paper. The realtor smiled, slid the folder back toward himself, and said the words I'd been waiting years to hear. "Congratulations, Captain Harper. It's yours." For a second, I just stared. Mine. The house was mine. No barracks, no cramped apartment with paper-thin walls, no landlords who treated repairs like hostage negotiations. My own home. Most people don't realize how long it takes to scrape this kind of dream together when your career is in the National Guard. Sure, the commercials make it look like shiny uniforms, flags, and smiling families on parade day. They don't show the part where you work 2 civilian jobs between deployments because your base pay doesn't stretch far enough. They don't show you driving a car so old that duct tape becomes part of your monthly budget. That was my life. That was the grind. I'd been through combat deployments where sand clogged everything I owned. I'd slept in armored vehicles and ate food so processed I swear it still haunts me. But the idea of a quiet house, a backyard, and a front door only I could open, that's what I kept in my head when I was out there. It was the carrot on a stick. Some people fantasize about vacations. I fantasized about new locks and granite countertops. So when the realtor handed me the keys, I felt like I was holding a medal. I didn't parade it around, though. I kept it silent. Not because I didn't want to celebrate, but because I'd learned the hard way that the wrong ears twist every victory into an obligation. In my family, success isn't yours, it's ours. And ours usually means someone else decides how to spend it. I remember slipping into the driver's seat of my beat-up Ford and just sitting there with the keys in my hand. I didn't even start the engine. I just looked at them. 1 key for the front door, 1 for the back, 1 for the garage. They were small, but to me, they were proof that discipline pays off. Years of missing birthdays, running drills in freezing rain, saving every extra dime, it was all sitting right there in my palm. When I finally drove out to the new place in Boise, Idaho, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the kind of silence you get when everyone in the barracks is asleep, but the kind that comes from distance. Houses not stacked on top of each other, trees throwing shadows across the yards, no thumping bass from the neighbor's kid, no late-night arguments through the walls, just space. The house itself wasn't some mansion. White siding, a front porch, windows that caught the afternoon light. To anyone else, it might look modest. To me, it looked like freedom. I opened the door, stepped inside, and inhaled. The air smelled like fresh paint and clean wood floors, not mildew or somebody else's mess. I kicked off my boots and walked room to room, touching the counters, opening the closets like I had to prove it was real. There's something strange about standing in an empty house that belongs to you. No furniture yet, no dishes, no curtains, just echoes. I dropped my bag on the floor in the living room and sat down. The hardwood was cold through my uniform pants, but I didn't care. I finally had 4 walls that no one else had a claim to, or so I thought. I should explain why I kept it quiet. My sister Diane, 42, has always had this knack for turning my milestones into her bargaining chips. When I joined the Guard, she told people it was because college didn't work out. When I got promoted, she said, "Well, it's about time you did something for yourself." And when I hinted once about saving for a house, she called it selfish. Her words, "You don't even have kids? What do you need all that space for? Think of Ethan and Sophie. They need room more than you." That was 2 years ago at a family dinner I'll never forget. Everyone nodded along with her like she was the voice of reason. I sat there pushing food around my plate while my own family voted me out of my own dream. That was the night I decided if I ever got the house, nobody would hear about it until the ink was dry and the locks were changed. So I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone except a couple of coworkers and my realtor. Even my closest friends in the guard only knew I was looking. I wasn't about to let Diane or anyone else turn this into a group project. This was mine. Standing in the kitchen, I pulled a mug from my backpack. I'd brought it just for this and brewed coffee in the bare bones machine I carried from place to place. That first sip tasted different. Not because the coffee was good, it was instant and bitter, but because I was drinking it in a place no one could evict me from. My paycheck bought the walls around me, not some landlord's next vacation. I didn't celebrate. No balloons, no champagne. I just walked to the front porch with my mug, leaned on the railing, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. Mrs. Garcia, 67, the neighbor across the street at 123 Maple Lane, waved from her driveway. She was the first to know, retired, widowed, sharp as ever. I introduced myself, kept it simple, and she said she'd keep an eye on the place when I was away. That was enough for me. As the darkness crept in, I locked the doors, checked them twice, then unrolled a sleeping bag in the living room. No furniture yet, no bed, just me, the sleeping bag, and the sound of nothing. I thought sleep would come easy, but it didn't. I kept listening, not out of fear, but out of habit. Years of light sleeping in uniform don't vanish just because you have a roof with your name on it. Lying there staring at the ceiling, I let the weight of it settle. I had finally done something entirely on my own terms. I didn't owe anyone rent. I didn't owe my sister explanations. I didn't owe my family proof that I wasn't wasting my life. I had this house. And yet, even in that moment of peace, I knew silence has its cost. Keeping secrets from family, even toxic ones, comes with fallout. I just didn't know how soon that fallout was going to show up on my doorstep. Family dinner drama. Thinking back, the seeds for that conflict were sown 2 years ago at a family dinner I'll never forget. The sound of silverware scraping against plates cut through the air louder than any conversation. I sat at the old oak table at 456 Pine Street, Boise, shoulders squared, fork hovering above a piece of roast I didn't really want. The smell of onions and garlic clung to the curtains. Diane sat across from me. Her teenage son, Ethan, 17, slouched beside her while her daughter, Sophie, 13, fidgeted with her phone under the table. My sister's eyes locked on me like she had been waiting for this exact moment to pounce. I cleared my throat and set my fork down. I've been saving for years, I said, steady but quiet. I'm finally ready to buy a house. For a split second, silence. Then a chuckle from Ethan, muffled by mashed potatoes. Diane's lips curled into a smirk that could slice glass. You? She asked, leaning back in her chair. You don't need a house, Lauren. You're barely even home. What are you going to do? Rattle around in some empty place all by yourself? I kept my voice calm. I've served in the Guard for 20 years. I've worked extra jobs. I think I've earned a little space of my own. Diane stabbed her roast with her fork like she was proving a point. Space, please. I have 2 kids crammed into one bedroom. Ethan's almost 6 feet tall. Sophie's about to start high school. They need space. You don't. You're one person. You should be helping us, not wasting money on some house you don't need. I felt heat climb my neck, but I kept my jaw tight. It wasn't the first time she tried to turn my choices into her entitlement. Around the table, the others stayed quiet. Our Aunt Judith, 55, nodded slightly like Diane was laying down the law. No one looked at me. Tara, one of Diane's friends who somehow always found a way to be at family dinners, leaned forward with her wine glass. Honestly, Lauren, she said lightly, it does seem a little selfish. You'll just sit in that house alone while these kids are sharing bunk beds. I caught Ethan rolling his eyes, but he didn't argue. Diane smiled at Tara's backup like she'd hired her to play defense. Selfish? I asked. My voice stayed even, but my heart was pounding. I gave up weekends, holidays, and half my paycheck to make sure these kids had shoes and books. I've been sending money back home for years. If I want to live in peace for once, that's selfish? Diane didn't blink. Yes, because family comes first. And when you're gone on deployment or training, who's here holding things together? Me. So, don't tell me about sacrifice. I've been raising kids while you've been off playing soldier. That cut sharper than I expected. Playing soldier. I clenched my hands under the table. Images of late-night convoys and medevac helicopters flashed in my head. The weight of armor, the sting of sand in my eyes, the nights I wondered if I'd see daylight again. Playing soldier. I looked around the table. No one met my eyes. Judith pushed peas around her plate like a child caught in a lie. Ethan chewed slowly, eyes on his plate, pretending he hadn't heard. Sophie kept tapping her phone. Diane leaned forward. You don't need a house. What you should do is help your family. If you've saved all this money, then you should think about Ethan's college fund, Sophie's school supplies, or maybe helping us move into a bigger apartment. That would actually make sense. A house for you? That's just ridiculous. Her voice rang out like a gavel slamming in court. Point delivered. I forced a smile, the kind you plaster on when you've already decided the fight isn't worth it. I picked up my fork again, stabbing the roast that had gone cold on my plate. Inside, though, something cracked. I had spent years imagining my family cheering me on when I finally made this dream real. A house wasn't just four walls to me. It was proof that discipline, sacrifice, and saving add up to something. But sitting there, surrounded by people who thought I was out of line for wanting it, I realized that if I ever did buy the house, I couldn't share it with them. Not in celebration, not in trust, not in anything. Diane leaned back with a satisfied sigh, sipping her wine like she'd won a case in court. Ethan asked if there was dessert. Sophie asked if she could go to her friend's house after. Life went on like nothing had just been declared. I excused myself early. In the hallway, I wrapped my scarf tight, pulled on my coat, and slipped out the door without looking back. The night air was sharp, almost bitter, but it cleared my head more than that dinner table ever could. I walked to my car, each step steady, each breath measured. My hands didn't shake when I gripped the steering wheel. I knew right then that if I wanted peace, I'd have to claim it on my own terms. And the first rule of claiming anything in my family was silence. I didn't call Diane the next day. I didn't update the group chat. I didn't say another word about the house, the savings, or my plans. I kept my head down at work, answered deployment calls when they came, and saved every extra cent I could. If my family thought my dream was ridiculous, they'd never hear about it again. But their laughter at that dinner table stayed with me. Diane's smirk burned into my memory. You don't need a house, she'd said. Maybe not in her eyes, but in mine, it wasn't about need. It was about finally choosing something for myself without permission, without a committee vote, and without her approval. That night, sitting in my car with the heater blasting, I promised myself two things. One, I would buy the house no matter how long it took. And two, when I did, Diane would be the last to know. Military discipline lessons. The smell of gun oil never really leaves your hands. Even years later, after dozens of showers, it clings to your memory like a second skin. I remember the nights in Afghanistan when the desert wind cut through every layer of gear, and the only warmth came from body heat trapped inside my vest. You'd think fear would keep you awake, but it was discipline. Fear makes you reckless. Discipline keeps you alive. Our platoon had been moving through a stretch of road outside Kandahar, the kind where every pile of trash looked like it could hide an IED. My job wasn't glamorous. I wasn't a sniper or some Hollywood hero. I was a logistics officer with a rifle, making sure supplies didn't get blown up before they reached the guys who needed them. But danger doesn't care about your job title. Out there, everyone's a target. The convoy stalled when the lead vehicle spotted wires crossing the road. The sun beat down, sweat rolling under my helmet. My heart wanted to race, but training pinned it down. Nobody spoke above a whisper. We all knew rushing forward would mean someone's name getting read at a memorial back home. So we waited, 10 minutes, 20, almost an hour, crouched in silence, scanning rooftops for movement, rifles trained on shadows that never moved. Patience in those moments was brutal. You want to run, to do something, anything. But you learn that doing nothing, holding, waiting, controlling every breath, is sometimes the hardest and most important action. The engineers came in, cleared the wires, and we rolled out without losing anyone. That night, back at the FOB, one of the younger soldiers asked me how I stayed so calm. I told him the truth. I wasn't calm. I just didn't let fear make the decisions. That's what discipline is, making choices when your gut screams the opposite. It wasn't just about combat either. Discipline was saving half my per diem when everyone else blew theirs on junk food. Discipline was running 5 miles in the morning, even when my legs felt like lead. Discipline was knowing when to shut my mouth and when to speak. Those lessons didn't just keep me alive. They built the backbone that got me to that closing table years later, signing for my dream home. I carried those habits back to civilian life. After a deployment, I'd land stateside, grab a civilian job to keep the bills paid, and stack cash like my life depended on it. Office politics didn't rattle me the way they rattled others. If you've been screamed at in a war zone, your manager's passive-aggressive emails don't really register. But the truth is, discipline didn't just help me in work or saving money. It trained me for family battles, too. At that dinner table with Diane, when she called me selfish and said I didn't need a house, every nerve in me wanted to lash out. Years of biting back anger on deployment taught me to sit still, keep my voice low, and let the silence do the talking. Losing my temper wouldn't have won me anything. Holding the line, though, that's what wins in the long run. The Army drills it into you. Control what you can control. Secure your perimeter, and don't advertise weakness. That mindset bled into every corner of my life. When I bought that house, I didn't shout it from the rooftops because I knew exactly what my family would do with the information. To them, my accomplishment would be open season for guilt trips and demands. Silence was my ops. There's a phrase we used overseas: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. It meant that rushing gets you killed. Moving methodically, carefully, with discipline, that's what gets you through alive. I applied that same logic to my finances, to my career, and eventually to keeping my dream home under wraps. Looking back, some of the clearest moments of my life weren't in peaceful living rooms, but in those sand-choked convoys where one wrong move could end everything. Like the time we took incoming fire near the Helmand River. Everyone dove for cover, rounds snapping past. My instinct wanted me to fire blindly into the night. Training told me to breathe, aim, and hold until I had a target. That patience saved ammo and probably kept us from drawing more fire. Those nights taught me that not every battle looks like one. Some are quiet wars, wars of patience, or of discipline, of choosing silence over chaos. That's why, years later, when my family tried to corner me into sharing my savings, I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I just shut the door on the conversation and doubled down on my goal. You don't come out of deployments the same person you were going in. Some people come back broken. I won't pretend I didn't bring scars, but I also came back sharper. I knew how to endure, how to keep focus when the world spun out of control. And I knew that if I wanted peace, real peace, I'd have to guard it like we guarded those convoys. Every dollar I saved was another checkpoint passed. Every temptation I ignored was another IED avoided. Every family jab I swallowed without response was another mission completed without casualties. That's how I saw it. That's how I lived. And when the time finally came to buy the house, I didn't feel surprised. I felt prepared, just like a mission I'd trained for months to execute. Walk in, sign, secure the objective, and hold the ground. So when I walked through those empty rooms with the keys in my pocket, I wasn't just some lucky home buyer. I was a soldier who had finished a campaign. And as I stood there running my hand along the smooth banister, I thought about every convoy, every freezing morning run, every night spent staring into darkness, waiting for a threat to show itself. All of it led here. That's why Diane's words at that dinner table couldn't touch me. She hadn't been there in the desert. She hadn't spent nights checking doors and scanning rooftops. She hadn't counted dollars like bullets, measuring out survival one paycheck at a time. She didn't know what it meant to live by discipline. I knew, though, and I knew that discipline would be the same weapon I'd need to keep my home safe from anyone who tried to take it from me, even my own blood. The grill smoked just enough to sting my eyes as I flipped a burger with one hand and balanced a paper plate in the other. The backyard wasn't anything fancy. Patchy grass, a couple of lawn chairs, and a folding table I borrowed from a buddy at work, but it was mine. For once, the voices around me weren't barking orders or arguing over family drama. They were laughing. A couple of fellow guardsmen swapped stories about a botched training exercise. Helen Garcia passed around a tray of homemade empanadas like she'd known me forever. It wasn't a big party, not even close. I kept it small on purpose. People I trusted, people who didn't measure my worth in square footage or bank balances. No Diane, no lectures, no guilt trips, just a handful of coworkers, a few friends from the guard, and neighbors who had already proven they knew how to mind their own business. The sun dipped lower, streaking the sky orange, and the sound of kids chasing each other mixed with the hiss of the grill. It felt like the kind of normal I'd been chasing for years. I leaned against the porch rail, plate in hand, watching as my guests filled the backyard. Nobody was judging the furniture or asking how much I'd paid. They were just happy to be here. I should have known peace never lasts. At some point, one of my guard buddies decided to snap a group photo. "Come on, Captain. Get in here," he said, holding up his phone. I squeezed into the frame, grinning like I hadn't in a long time. It was a harmless photo, people shoulder to shoulder, burgers in hand, me in the middle looking like I actually belonged somewhere. Later that night, after the last guest left and I was washing plastic cups in the sink, I saw the photo pop up on social media. My buddy had tagged me, captioned it with some cheesy line about Captain Harper finally off duty, grilling like a pro. I froze. The picture showed me on the porch, red front door in the background, the kind of detail anyone in the family could recognize if they wanted to. My stomach tightened. I hadn't planned on telling Diane about the house. Not now. Maybe not ever. I didn't need her commentary or her endless list of reasons why I should have spent the money differently. But one photo online could undo months of careful silence. I clicked through the comments. Friends laughing, neighbors chiming in. No Diane. Not yet. But I knew her habits. She scrolled more than she lived. It was only a matter of time before she saw it. The sister and the stolen key. The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen counter, phone in hand, staring at that photo like it was a landmine waiting to go off. Sure enough, by noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Nice house." "When were you planning to tell your own sister?" No emojis, no exclamation points, just that flat tone she used when she wanted me to feel guilty. I didn't answer. Not right away. I walked from room to room, coffee mug in hand, feeling my blood pressure climb. She wasn't asking because she was happy for me. She was staking a claim. Another text came. "The kids would love a backyard like that. Maybe we'll come by this weekend. Not can we visit? Not congrats. Just an assumption. Like my front door was revolving and she already had the code. I put the phone down on the counter and rubbed my temples. I should have locked my social media years ago. Better yet, I should have smashed the damn phone that night instead of letting that photo circulate. Discipline, I reminded myself. Don't react. Don't take the bait. But deep down, I knew Diane. This wasn't curiosity. This was reconnaissance. That Saturday, I caught her car idling at the curb in front of my house at 789 Cedar Avenue. She didn't even try to hide it. I watched from the living room window as she leaned against the steering wheel, Ethan and Sophie in the back seat. She texted me while she sat there out front. Thought we'd stop by? I didn't open the door. I didn't respond. After 10 minutes, she drove off. But the seed was planted. She knew where I live now. She'd seen the house with her own eyes. I could almost hear her already planning how to use it, how to spin my dream into her next excuse, her next demand. The following week, she came again. This time, she didn't text first. She knocked, loud and impatient. When I opened the door a crack, she pushed past me like she owned the place. Wow, she said, turning in a slow circle in the entryway. This is nice. Her tone wasn't admiration. It was assessment, like a realtor sizing up square footage. I crossed my arms. Don't get comfortable. This isn't a tour. She ignored me, of course, wandering into the kitchen, opening cabinets, running her hand along the counters. Ethan would kill for a kitchen like this. And Sophie, oh, she'd love having her own room upstairs. You've got 3 bedrooms, right? I clenched my jaw. 2.5. And they're not for Sophie. Diane spun around, fake smile plastered on. Relax, Lauren. I'm just saying this is way too much space for one person. You'll get lonely rattling around in here. It only makes sense to share it with the family. There it was. The same script she'd used at that dinner table years ago, just recycled to fit my new address. I walked past her, opened the front door wide. Visits over. She gave me that look, the one that used to make me shrink when we were kids, a mix of condescension and challenge. But I wasn't a kid anymore, and this wasn't her turf. After a beat, she scooped up her purse and huffed out, tossing a sing-song "See You Soon" over her shoulder. When the door shut, I leaned against it, keys clutched in my hand. For a second, I wondered if I'd overreacted. Then I saw the way she'd lingered near the counter, eyeing my keys when she thought I wasn't looking. And just like that, doubt vanished. Discipline reminded me, what you don't secure, you lose. I tightened my grip on the keys and walked to the kitchen, replaying every second of her visit. Diane's smile, her hands on the cabinets, the way she tested my patience like she was testing a lock. She wasn't done. She was just getting started. Neighbor's warning ignored. The next time Diane showed up, she didn't bother knocking like a guest. She waltzed in right after I opened the door, carrying a grocery bag in one hand like she'd been invited. Thought I'd bring snacks, she said, breezing past me into the kitchen. I didn't remember asking for company, and I sure as hell didn't ask for her store-bought cookies. She set them on the counter and gave me that bright fake smile. See, I can be helpful too. I leaned on the counter with my arms crossed. Helpful would have been calling first. She ignored me and started pulling out a package of cookies and a 6-pack of soda. Ethan and Sophie have been driving me crazy. This house feels like a vacation compared to our place. It's so quiet. She said it with a sigh, like she was already making herself comfortable. I wasn't interested in entertaining her, but kicking her out would have meant a fight I didn't have the energy for. I told myself I'd give her 10 minutes and then send her on her way. She kept walking around, eyes flicking over the furniture I'd barely managed to buy, touching the new curtains, inspecting the framed photo of me in uniform that sat on a shelf. You've done well for yourself, Lauren, she said, voice dripping with the kind of praise that feels more like a setup. Really well. I didn't trust the compliment. Diane only handed those out when she was about to cash in. At one point, I stepped away to the bathroom. I wasn't gone long, maybe a couple of minutes, but when I came back, Diane was standing by the counter where my keys sat. She picked them up casually, twirling them around her finger like she was just making conversation. "You've got a lot of locks," she said. "What's this one for?" "The garage?" I froze. My gut tightened. She wasn't just curious, she was testing. "Put them down," I said flatly. She laughed, the kind of laugh meant to diffuse tension. "Relax, I'm just kidding. You're so serious all the time." She dropped the keys back on the counter, her smile never slipping. I walked over, picked them up, and slipped them into my pocket. "They're not toys." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. That flash told me more than her words ever could. The rest of the visit was short. I didn't let her linger. I walked her to the door, locked it behind her, and stood there in silence. My training kicked in. After action review, catalog every detail. Diane's sudden generosity with snacks, her fake compliments, her hands on my keys. She wasn't just visiting, she was casing the place. A week later, I confirmed my suspicion. I came home from work and noticed the key ring felt lighter in my pocket. Not missing, just off. I checked twice. Every key was still there, but the front door key had a tiny mark near the edge, a scratch that hadn't been there before. I'd cleaned and checked those keys often enough to know. Diane had found a way to make a copy. She'd had enough time while I was out of the room, a plastic mold, a quick press, and she could have walked out with everything she needed to duplicate it. That realization hit like a sucker punch. I called one of my buddies from the Guard, who now worked in private security. He confirmed what I already suspected. "Yeah, it doesn't take much," he said. "Some people carry soft plastic just for that. Press the key in, boom. Hardware store can cut a copy in 10 minutes. I sat at the kitchen table, turning the key ring over in my hand, the weight suddenly heavier. She'd crossed a line, not just with me, but with the law. But how do you accuse your own sister of stealing your house key without looking paranoid? Discipline told me not to jump the gun. Instead, I decided to watch, to prepare. That night, I put the keys on the counter again, but this time I set up a small camera in the corner of the kitchen. Not obvious, not flashy, just enough to record if she ever tried again. I wasn't going to confront her without proof. The next time she visited, she didn't touch the keys. She didn't even glance at them. Too careful. That almost confirmed it more than if she had grabbed them again. Diane wasn't dumb. She was bold, but she knew how to cover tracks. I caught her wandering upstairs instead, peeking into closets, opening doors, commenting on the size of the rooms. "You don't even use half this space," she said, shaking her head. "It's such a waste." I followed close behind, arms crossed, saying nothing. She filled the silence herself. "Sophie would love a room like this. Ethan could finally spread out instead of sleeping in that shoebox at our place. I mean, really, Lauren, what are you doing with all this room? You don't even have kids." Her tone wasn't casual anymore. It was a probe, testing for weakness, testing if I'd cave, if I'd let her stake a claim. I didn't answer. I just guided her back downstairs, opened the front door, and waited. When she finally left, the smile on her face wasn't warm or sisterly. It was sharp, like she just won a round. I didn't know we were playing. I shut the door, locked it, and double-checked the windows. Then I walked back to the counter, picked up the keys, and shoved them into a drawer. I didn't trust her anymore, and I wasn't about to pretend otherwise. Truth on the cameras. That night, lying in bed, I thought about every rule drilled into me during service. Secure your perimeter. Trust, but verify. Assume nothing. Diane wasn't a random burglar, but in some ways, she was worse. A burglar takes what they can and runs. Diane wanted to take everything and then invite people over to celebrate in my living room. I closed my eyes, fists clenched under the blanket. She had a copy of my key. I knew it. And sooner or later, she was going to use it. The second night of my training trip, my phone buzzed across the hotel nightstand just after 10 p.m. I almost ignored it, figuring it was another pointless group text from the unit. Then I saw the caller ID. Helen Garcia. My neighbor didn't call unless it mattered. I answered, "Helen, everything okay?" Her voice was low, serious. "Lauren, I don't want to alarm you, but I can see lights on in your house. Music, too. It's faint, but I know what I'm hearing." I sat up, heart pounding. "You're sure?" "I've lived across from your place for 20 years, she said. "I know when something's not right." I got up and walked to the window, staring at the parking lot lights outside, phone pressed to my ear. My brain scrambled for rational explanations. Maybe I left a lamp on. Maybe the wind knocked something over. Maybe Helen was catching echoes from another house. I forced calm into my voice. "I appreciate you calling. I'll check when I get back." She paused, then said flatly, "All right then," and hung up. Sleep never came that night. I lay in the stiff hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. Lights, music, not right. By morning, the logical side of me had almost won. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe a timer I forgot to turn off, maybe Helen was mistaken. But the doubt gnawed at me. When I got back 2 days later, I didn't even unpack. I drove straight from the base to the bakery, bought a pie, and walked across the street to Helen's house. She let me in, eyebrows raised. "I should have listened," I said, sliding the pie onto her kitchen table. "I'm sorry." She didn't scold me. She just picked up her phone, tapped the screen, and handed it to me. A shaky video played, grainy, shot from her window. My house lit up, shadows moving across the curtains, the faint outline of someone lifting a glass. I felt cold all over. "You caught this that night?" She nodded. I closed my eyes for a second, steadying my breath. Proof, not paranoia. Proof. That week, I called a security company. By Friday, tiny cameras were tucked into corners inside and out, invisible unless you knew where to look. I reset every password, installed motion sensors, and gave Helen the direct line to reach me if anything looked off. Kindness had given way to vigilance. I still waved at neighbors, still watered the plants by the porch, but inside I was all business. Locks double-checked, feeds monitored, alerts tested twice a day. My home was no longer just a house. It was a position to defend. When the next training trip came up, I didn't hesitate. I locked every door, checked every window, and pulled up the live feed before I even left the driveway. Nothing moved. Everything in its place. The first night passed quietly. The second too. Then, just after 11 p.m. on the third night, my phone lit up again. "Helen, something's happening," she whispered. Almost at the same time, a notification flashed on my screen. Motion detected. Living room camera. I tapped the alert. The screen filled with movement. Figures in the living room. Music pulsed faintly through the tiny speaker. My stomach dropped. At first, I told myself it might be shadows, maybe a glitch. But then one of the figures stepped into the light. Diane. She was stretched out on my armchair like it was her throne. Ethan and a couple of his friends ran across the floor, chasing each other, knocking into the walls. Diane raised a glass high, her voice carrying even through the poor audio. My throat went dry. It wasn't strangers. It wasn't a break-in by chance. It was my own blood holding court in my living room like she owned it. I gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white, forcing myself not to hurl it across the room. Every instinct screamed to call her right then, to shout through the speaker, to demand what gave her the right. But the soldier in me knew better. Shouting was noise. Noise wasn't action. I stayed on the feed, watching them laugh, pour drinks, clink glasses. Tara was there too, of course, hovering in the kitchen, pulling out dishes I'd barely used. Kids stomped upstairs, doors slammed, feet pounded against the floorboards. My quiet home shook with chaos, even through a scream. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to steady the surge of rage. All those years of saving, all those deployments, all those nights I told myself silence would someday be mine. And here was Diane tearing it apart in front of neighbors and friends without a second thought. But anger wasn't going to win this battle. Discipline would. Military decision and family revenge. I kept my eyes on the screen, jaw tight, every muscle wired. If she thought she could waltz into my home and claim it, she had another thing coming. The decision I made in that hotel room wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, like locking a round into a chamber. My family had crossed the line, and the next move wasn't going to be theirs. The feed was so clear, I could see the condensation sliding down Diane's wine glass. She leaned back in my chair, the one I bought new, after years of hand-me-down furniture, as if she'd been sitting there her whole life. Around her, the room buzzed with people I barely knew. Ethan sprawled across my couch, tossing popcorn at Sophie, while Tara poured my wine from the decanter I promised myself I'd only use for quiet evenings. My house wasn't just being used. It was being overrun. I wanted to hit the call button right then, to scream into the phone and demand that Diane get the hell out. But I forced myself to stay still. My training echoed in my head. Don't rush. Don't react out of anger. Assess, confirm, execute. I sat straighter, my voice calm as I spoke out loud in the hotel room, even though no one was there to hear. Not your house, not your party, not your win. My hand hovered for a moment, steady now, not shaking with rage. Then I dialed the only number that mattered. The dispatcher answered, voice sharp, professional. 911, what's your emergency? I kept my tone level, every word precise. There are intruders in my home. I'm out of town, but I can see them on my security cameras right now. The operator asked for details. I gave them, description, address, how many people. When she asked if I could identify the intruders, I swallowed hard before answering. Yes, I said. They're my family. The words came out heavy, each one landing like a stone, but they were the truth. I stayed on the line as the dispatcher confirmed officers were en route. I opened the feed again, phone balanced in my hand, and kept watching. Then headlights flashed across the cameras, sweeping the walls. The sound of pounding on the front door boomed through the speakers. The music cut, heads turned, faces froze. Jake, one of Ethan's buddies, half drunk and full of bravado, swaggered to the door, threw it open, and started mouthing off to the officers. I couldn't hear every word, but I saw the gestures. The officers didn't flinch. They stepped inside, firm and calm, while the room behind him ground to a halt. In seconds, Jake's arms were twisted behind his back, cuffs flashing under the porch light. The chaos rippled through the room. Ethan lunged forward, yelling. Diane shot out of my chair, her voice cracking, trying to make excuses. Sophie clung to a blanket, her face pale, frozen in the corner. And I sat in that hotel room, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dispatcher, watching my house fill with blue and red lights. One by one, the officers guided people out. The crowd of neighbors widened, phones glowing like a line of judgment. When the final door shut, My house sat empty again. The music silenced. The walls no longer shook. The dispatcher spoke again. Ma'am, the situation is under control. Officers will file a report and notify you about next steps. Is there anything else you want noted? I swallowed, staring at the frozen image of my living room on the feed. Yes, I said quietly. Note that entry was unauthorized. They had no permission to be in my home. Understood. I hung up, set the phone on the table, and sat there in silence. The discipline that kept me calm didn't erase the burn in my chest. Betrayal has its own kind of sting, but this wasn't going to be handled with shouting. This was going to be handled with precision. Confrontation at the station. The officer motioned me toward a table in the corner, a stack of forms already laid out. I sat down, the chair cold against my back, and folded my hands on the surface. The room smelled like burnt coffee and paper that had been filed and refiled too many times. The door opened again, and Diane walked in, dragging Ethan and Tara like baggage she didn't want but couldn't ditch. Her heels clicked against the linoleum, her purse swinging on her arm with unnecessary force. She saw me and immediately put on a face, half pleading, half accusatory. Lauren, please, she started, her voice already cracking. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding. We're family. We didn't mean... I cut her off with a steady look. You didn't mean to copy my key. You didn't mean to throw a party in my house while I was out of town. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. She looked to Ethan for backup. Mom, he said, his voice raw, like he'd been yelling before I got there. We needed space. Our place is too small. Sophie can't even do her homework without noise. We thought, Tara began. You thought wrong, I said flatly. Tara piped up, mascara smudged under her eyes. We weren't hurting anything. We cleaned up. It was just one night. I leaned forward, my hands still folded, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut. You weren't hurting anything? You trashed my living room. You used my things. You let your drunk friend mouth off to cops at my front door. You broke in, Tara. That's not just one night. That's trespassing. The officer standing by the wall cleared his throat. Miss Harper, we've investigated. It appears your sister used a mold to duplicate your key during a previous visit. From there, duplicates were made. Diane's face drained of color. She shot a look at Tara, who stiffened but said nothing. I let the silence stretch, the weight of their choices hanging heavy. Then I spoke again, voice even. You stole from me, not money, not things. You stole the peace I worked 20 years to earn, and you thought you'd get away with it because we're family. Diane's eyes filled, but it wasn't remorse. It was anger dressed up as tears. You don't understand. We're drowning. Bills, rent, everything. You don't have kids to worry about. You don't. I cut her off again, sharper this time. Don't you dare tell me I don't understand sacrifice. I raised Ethan after his dad left you in debt. I helped with Sophie's school supplies when you forgot. I've covered you more times than I can count. Don't stand there and act like I owe you my house. Ethan's face crumpled, his bravado gone. For the first time, I saw the little boy I used to carry to soccer practice, not the man trying to justify breaking into my home. The officer slid the forms across the table. We'll need your statement and your signature if you want to press charges. The pen felt heavy in my hand. Diane's voice rushed in, panicked now. Lauren, don't. Please, you're my sister. You can't do this. Think of the kids. Think of what this will do to us. I looked at her, really looked, and realized she still didn't get it. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't apologizing. She was bargaining, trying to wriggle out of the net she'd walked into. I signed. The ink bled into the paper, smooth and final. Diane gasped like I'd shot her. Ethan dropped his head into his hands. Tara muttered something under her breath, too quiet to catch. The officer collected the forms, noting the time. "Thank you, Miss Harper. We'll proceed." I nodded. The rest of the room blurred. Diane's voice faded. Ethan's sniffles dulled. Tara's glare bounced off me like rain on armor. All I heard was the scratch of the pen, the sound of boundaries being drawn. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor, and looked Diane in the eye one last time. "You wanted my house?" I said evenly. "But you lost me instead." Her lips trembled, words failing her for once. I didn't wait. I walked out, the click of the station door shutting behind me louder than any argument we'd ever had. The night air outside was cool, sharp. I took a breath so deep it felt like my first in years. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't carrying Diane's weight on my shoulders. I wasn't free of the fallout that would come, but I was free of the illusion that family meant I had to keep sacrificing. That, more than anything, steadied me as I walked to my car. Fallout of family betrayal. When I got back to the house, the silence was heavier than usual. The locks clicked into place behind me, but it didn't feel like safety yet. It felt like aftermath. I walked through each room, noting every mess they'd left behind. Couch cushions scattered on the floor, crumbs ground into the rug, wine stains blotched across the counter. Upstairs, Sophie's blanket was still balled up on my bed, the smell of perfume clinging to the sheets. I didn't yell or cry. I grabbed trash bags and started cleaning. Every cup, every plate, every piece of evidence that they'd been here went straight into the bags. I wasn't preserving their fingerprints. I was reclaiming what was mine. By the time the sun came up, the house smelled of disinfectant, and the trash cans outside overflowed with the remnants of their party. But cleaning didn't erase the damage. News traveled fast in a town like Boise. By Monday morning, the fallout had started. Diane's mugshot wasn't public, but Jake's was. The video of him getting cuffed on my porch was already circulating online, neighbors whispering over it at the coffee shop. His employer saw it and dropped him within 24 hours. Ethan got hauled into a disciplinary meeting at school. He wasn't arrested, but word spread. Coaches didn't want the drama. Teachers gave him looks, and his chances at a scholarship shrank overnight. Sophie wasn't in trouble with the law, but middle school kids can be crueler than cops. By Wednesday, she was being teased about her new house and laughed at for showing up at someone else's home uninvited. Diane's phone call started almost immediately. First, it was frantic. "Lauren, please, we can fix this." Then it turned angry. "You didn't have to go that far." Finally, it turned quiet, guilt-laden. "We're family." "How could you?" I didn't pick up. Every voicemail got saved into a folder, right alongside the security footage and the police report. Evidence. The extended family weighed in too. My cousin Melissa, 38, called, voice low, trying to play mediator. "Lauren, you know Diane's always been a little reckless. Do you really want her kids to suffer for this?" I bit back the laugh that threatened to spill out. Suffer? Ethan was old enough to know right from wrong. Sophie would survive a few playground taunts. Diane had brought this on herself, and I wasn't carrying her anymore. I answered Melissa with one sentence. "If I had broken into your house and thrown a party, would you be calling to defend me?" She went quiet, muttered something about just trying to keep the peace, and hung up. Word spread further than family. At the base, a few fellow guardsmen pulled me aside, some smirking, some serious. "Heard you had to call in backup on your own family," one of them joked. I shrugged it off. Better they laugh than pity me. Another just nodded, serious as ever. "Boundaries are hard, but you drew yours. Good on you, Captain." The respect mattered. Soldiers know the cost of discipline. Civilians talk about forgiveness like it's free. Soldiers know every choice has weight. Meanwhile, Diane kept pushing. She showed up at Helen's house one afternoon, pounding on the door, trying to get her to intervene. Helen told me later that she didn't even open the screen. "Not my business," she said, shutting Diane down with the same bluntness she'd used when she first warned me. Other neighbors weren't so neutral. Some avoided me altogether, afraid of being caught in the drama. A couple went out of their way to tell me I'd done the right thing. "Family or not, that was your house," Mr. Thompson, 62, said while walking his dog. "You worked for it. You earned it. No one else gets a vote." Each comment, each nod, each quiet moment of support chipped away at the guilt Diane tried to load on me. But guilt has a long shelf life, especially when it's baked into years of obligation. Late at night, I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one Diane had leaned back in, glass in hand, claiming my space as hers. Sometimes the echo of her laughter rang louder than the silence. That's when I'd open the folder, police reports, video clips, photos, proof, hard evidence that this wasn't paranoia, wasn't some overreaction I'd regret later, proof that I had been violated in the one place I was supposed to be safe. And every time it steadied me. Weeks rolled by, each one stretching further between her calls. Ethan kept his head down at school. Sophie stopped showing up at sleepovers. Diane's friends pulled back, unwilling to risk their own reputations. The Whitman family that once seemed so loud, so demanding, so entitled, it shrank down to whispers and silence. Some in the family started calling me cold. "She's your sister," they'd say. "Blood is blood." But blood doesn't give you the right to invade, to steal, to claim. Blood doesn't erase boundaries. I didn't defend my country for 20 years just to hand over my house because someone shared my last name. What surprised me most wasn't the betrayal itself. It was how quickly the world moved on without her. Diane had always acted like the sun rose and set on her problems, like everyone else should orbit around her chaos. But once the reports were filed, once the neighbors moved on to other gossip, once the fallout landed squarely on her doorstep, life went on without her. And for the first time in years, I felt lighter. I wasn't naive. I knew she might try again someday, in some way. Manipulation was her skill set after all. But I had boundaries now, reinforced with more than locks and cameras. I had proof, support, and the kind of discipline you don't unlearn after decades in uniform. The betrayal hurt, but it didn't own me. Peace through discipline. I stood on the porch one morning, coffee in hand, watching the street as the sun came up. Helen waved from across the way, her little dog tugging at the leash. The world looked normal again, quiet, steady, and for once, I believed it could stay that way. Inside, the house felt mine again, not because Diane had stopped circling, but because I had stopped letting her in. The first weekend after the dust settled, I called a locksmith. He showed up in a white van with a battered toolbox. No questions asked, no small talk. I stood by as he replaced every lock on every door, swapped out the deadbolts, and even suggested a reinforced strike plate for the front entry. "Military grade," he said with a grin. I just nodded. If only he knew how much that phrase meant to me. When he finished, I tested each lock myself. The solid click of new steel sliding home. For the first time since Diane forced her way into my house, I felt something close to secure. Not safe forever. Nothing in life is guaranteed, but secure enough to breathe without second-guessing every shadow. I didn't stop there. I called the security company again and upgraded the system. Cameras with better resolution, alerts tied to my phone, passwords so complex even I had to write them down. Some might call it overkill. To me, it was insurance, not against strangers, but against the people who once thought my silence was weakness. Once the work was done, I opened the windows. The fall breeze swept through, carrying the smell of fresh-cut grass and a neighbor's barbecue. I brewed a pot of coffee stronger than usual and poured 2 mugs. Helen came over, her little dog trotting at her heels. She sat across from me on the porch, placing a loaf of sweetbread between us. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. She sipped her coffee. I sipped mine. And we watched the streetcars rolling past, kids biking down the sidewalk. Nothing extraordinary, just life. For me, that ordinary peace was worth more than anything. Every so often, Diane's name still popped up on my phone. Voicemails I didn't listen to, texts I didn't answer. Once, she even came by, standing at the end of the driveway like a trespasser, afraid to step too far. She didn't knock. She didn't yell. She just stood there until Helen walked out of her house and gave her a look that could cut glass. Diane left without a word. I realized then that the real battle had never been about locks or walls. It had been about discipline, about drawing the line and holding it, no matter how much family or guilt tried to blur it. In the military, you learn that hesitation costs lives. In civilian life, hesitation costs peace. I walked through the house one night, barefoot, lights dim. The wood floors creaked under my steps, but it was my sound in my space. The living room was neat again, no stains, no chaos. The wine decanter sat back on its shelf, untouched since the night I saw Diane pour it for her friends. Upstairs, the bedrooms were in order, doors closed, closets full of nothing but my things. It struck me that for the first time, the house wasn't just a structure I bought. It was proof of every late-night shift, every skipped vacation, every deployment I endured. Proof that sacrifice could lead to something solid, something you could hold a key to. Proof that silence, when defended, was stronger than noise. I poured another cup of coffee, leaned against the counter, and let myself smile. Not the guarded smile I'd worn for years when Diane asked for just one more favor. Not the polite smile I wore at family dinners. A real one. I knew people would talk. Some already had. Cousins muttering that I was heartless, neighbors gossiping about the police cars, even a few coworkers hinting that maybe I'd been too harsh. Let them talk. They weren't the ones footing the bills. They weren't the ones whose house had been violated. They weren't the ones who spent 2 decades dreaming of quiet, only to have it trampled by their own blood. I'd earned my peace, and I wasn't going to hand it over for anyone else's comfort. Helen took another sip of coffee and glanced at me. "You know," she said, "most people would have folded. Family guilt, pressure, all that. But you stood your ground. That's rare." I shrugged. "Discipline, it's all I know." She smiled, nodding like she understood more than she let on. The sun dipped lower, painting the street in gold. A flag across the way caught the breeze, snapping sharply against the pole. I watched it for a moment, the red, white, and blue stark against the fading sky. Not because I'm sentimental, but because it reminded me of why I'd fought in the first place. For freedom, for security, for the right to draw lines and know they'd hold. My house was more than walls and a roof. It was the line I had drawn, the one Diane tried to erase. And no matter what anyone thought, I'd proven I could defend it. When I finally turned in for the night, the locks clicked behind me. The cameras blinked their tiny lights, and the silence wrapped around me like armor. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was the final confirmation that I'd fought enough, given enough, and now, finally, I could keep something for myself. And for the first time in years, I slept without a single interruption. Looking back, I don't regret a single choice. People hear family and think it's supposed to excuse everything, bad behavior, betrayal, even breaking the law. But family isn't a free pass. If anything, it's supposed to mean accountability. Diane never understood that. She thought sharing blood meant sharing everything else, including the home I bled and worked for. What she didn't count on was discipline. Years in uniform taught me that you can love people and still draw hard lines with them. You can care about their struggles and still refuse to let them rob you of what you've built. Standing my ground didn't make me cold. It made me free. I know some folks will never see it that way. They'll shake their heads, say I should have handled it quietly or kept it in the family. But quiet is what let Diane push boundaries for decades. Quiet is what made her think she could walk into my home like she owned it. Silence without action isn't peace. It's surrender. Now, when I step onto my porch with a mug of coffee, I see more than a yard or a front door. I see proof. Proof that sacrifice meant something. Proof that every deployment, every sleepless night, every extra shift wasn't wasted. I fought for freedom overseas, but the most important battle I ever won was right here at home, defending my line, protecting my peace. Diane may never forgive me. The family may stay divided. Ethan and Sophie may carry their embarrassment longer than they should. That's not on me. That's the cost of choices. All I know is this: my house stands, my silence holds, and for once in my life, I don't owe anyone an apology for it.